Here we go. So, welcome everyone, all two of us. I am so excited to be here today with Abigail and learn about her background and her creative process, especially between, the overlap and interconnection between your belly dancing and your writing, and how your history, your background has informed those practices. So I'm going to start off with the dreaded thing that everybody hates, but I don't like introducing people because I like to hear how you see yourself. That is my favorite thing, is to hear what you think is important about you or unique about you. And I'm just going to turn it over to you, let you just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks. I'm excited to be here. Um, so I guess we'll start with the now. So currently, I am focusing on the world of words. So I'm an author, I'm an editor, and I'm also a book coach. So I help people basically finish their books and prepare them for publication. And I work in both nonfiction and fiction because I have a very unusual and diverse background, and I bring that into my work as an editor and a coach. So before that, I spent over 10 years kind of professionally, but 20 years in the dance scene as a professional belly dancer. Um, and I was touring the world teaching and performing, which was an incredible opportunity. And I study mostly with the Salimpur School of Dance, which is a very rigorous program that has like levels and testing. It's very, if you could think of like martial arts and its belt system, it's very similar to that. And so I earn the highest level, which is that teaching certification. So I am a certified instructor in that format, which is pretty prestigious in our world. And before that, I was an intelligence analyst at the CIA. This is no lie. This is absolutely true. I can even show you like the award that my group got and be like, no, it's real. Um,
Really?
and so what's the link there? So my undergrad degree is in it technically Near Eastern Studies. Um, and I have always been interested in the Middle East in various forms and eras. So everything from ancient Egyptian history all the way through to modern politics and social trends and media, and especially in the performing arts. So the through lines here obviously are Middle Eastern, which I know that term is a little outdated now. I'm kind of going on a tangent, but now in light of recent events in Israel Palestine, people are now saying SWANA, which is Southwest Asian and North African.
Okay.
So, um, yeah, that's a through line because when I graduated college, I had this degree, I'd studied Arabic. I went into the agency and then worked on Iraq right after the US invasion. So it was very high stress, very high stakes. And then I also worked on Libya, and this was when Gaddafi was still in power, and we were working on issues related to opening up diplomatic relationships with Libya because that was, we'd basically shut everything down and then we were opening things up again. And then I then shifted to something totally unrelated and did biosafety and biosecurity because another one of my weird special interests is virology and epidemiology. So I did that for a bit and then decided that that was burning me out. The sort of the 9 to 5 and there's it's a very high pressure job, right? Like you have like it's a little the landscape's a little different now, but back then I mean, you have the president and Secretary of Defense and all these people like relying on you all the time. I was like, I don't know if I want to do this. I want to go be creative. So that's when I resigned and started my belly dance career and really studied belly dance. And then from there, I got a master's in dance studies at Mills College, which was absolutely the perfect thing for me at the time because it also rounded me out with modern dance and postmodern dance, a lot of experimental and improvisational skills. Worked with some brilliant professors and sort of got me out of my quote unquote ethnic dance bubble and out into a more kind of concert dance world. And and then was teaching dance, and then the pandemic happened, and things were actually pretty good. I was teaching on Zoom, and because my partner and I were a high risk household, I was like, do I really want to go back to going to big festivals and being in dance studios and that whole thing? And I was like, I can't really do that anymore. So this is getting long, but while in the time that I was doing dance, I had also been writing. I was writing copywriting, doing blog posts for companies and corporations, and also writing books. So I had written a textbook for the dance school that I was a part of. It was basically the book on belly dance in the Middle East that I always wanted and never had,
Hmm.
which was sort of just an introduction. Like, here's an overview of the history of belly dance in the 20th century up to, or, early 21st, and then here's a basic history of the Middle East. Here are some theoretical things to consider. So there's a little section about feminism in dance. There's a section about Orientalism, and it was like kind of just that like intro. Like,
Hmm.
here's an intro. So I wrote that, and then my partner, who's also an author, and he's a musician as well, and he and I wrote an introduction to Middle Eastern music. So we wrote that, and then we also wrote a book called it's currently called Weird Dance, but we wanted to call it Isadora Duncan's Neck. It's actually the third of a series that he started on sort of unusual performing arts history. So he has one on music, he has one on theater, and then we have one on dance. So we co-wrote this book of unusual history um, in dance. So kind of ghost stories and unusual practices. There's a section on the choreomania and the sort of in the Middle Ages where people just danced themselves mad. And so we were writing, and that was traditionally published, and then the textbooks were self-published through the school. And I had done some editing work, and so in the last couple years, I was like, yeah, I think I need to shift. And also, like, I'm older now than I was 20 years ago, so my energy levels are shifting, my priorities are shifting. I was like, what if I could help people write their books? Like, um, uh, information. What do I say? Like, this is gonna sound really vague, but information and storytelling has always let me back this up over. I grew up in a house like just filled with books, and so reading and stories, and especially nonfiction like history, has always been the significant part of my life. And there's part of me that's like, okay, it's time for me to help other people do that as well. So that's the long story. Short story is degree in Middle Eastern Studies, intelligence analyst, belly dancer, writer, author, editor, boat coach. That's the
I
TLDR.
I love that so much because there is so much tie-in from each step. Like it's not just like I set this down and I picked up something completely different. It's just pivots, and I love the fact that it really highlights how no matter how different we think things are, they're really not that different. There's some connection somewhere if you take the time to look for it. And so, like, on paper, like we were saying before this started, people are like, what on earth kind of a career history is this? But it makes so much sense. They are such logical pivots from one to the next. Um, so I'll ask, as you've made this transition through your life, um, definitely it sounds like the Middle Eastern, and I'm sorry, I forgot
Oh,
already.
don't worry about it. It's SWANA.
SWANA. I was like, I have never heard that before. And then
Yeah, that's why I
that,
thought I'd mention it because it's kind of starting to percolate through the popular parlance. But anyway, go keep going.
but yes, so how much I see that interest tying through, going from your background in the CIA to belly dancing and the books you wrote with your partner, and then I know your novel is based in Egypt. Yes, so I see that tying through, but has your how do I want to ask this? Um, you know, I guess to take a sidestep, people tend to see creatives as being like, they do that whole left brain, right brain thing. Like, are you
Yeah.
analytical or are you creative? And they there's a tendency to separate the two. Like there's this dichotomy and you can't be you got to be one or the other. You're not going to be both, which, we both know is not the case. But so how I guess what I'm trying to ask is how have you brought that analytical thought process, how has that informed your creative practice?
Ooh, I love this question.
Oh, I'm
Because,
glad it
yeah,
makes sense by
I
the end.
don't think I'd ever really thought of it before because I'm an analytical creative. That's just where I hang out.
Mhm.
My first instinctual like response to this is um yeah, that right brain left thing. My first instinctual response is the demystification and the deromanticization, if that makes sense, of the creative process. And I think a lot of people who are not who aspire to be creatives with a capital C, like whatever that means, have this idea in their head of like, I'm going to be an artist and I'm going to be creative. But what they're not seeing is that you need to get to work. Like, you need to
Yeah.
show up at the page, at the computer, at the canvas, whatever your media is, you have to show up regularly. And
Mhm.
one thing that all of my background has taught me is that if you show up regularly, if you go to class, if you show up at the page, right now I'm returning to my childhood love of figure skating. If I go to the rink, um, if um, I go to the studio, it doesn't have to be every day, but it does have to be regular and it has to be predictable. If you do that, you will make progress and you will open up the doors for, I like to say the muse, but whatever that sort of that higher
Mhm.
influence, whatever you want to call it, if you don't show up regularly, that's not going, it might happen once or twice, but it's not going to be predictable enough for you to create a body of work, and it's not going to be predictable enough for you to really feel like you're making progress and improving. And that's where people get frustrated. They're like, I don't like what I'm doing, or I don't like what I'm making. It's like, I just wrote a post about how I'm tearing up the first half of my second novel. I was like, I didn't like it. So what does that mean? I have to sit down and have to get to work. And that's that analytical side of, okay, now how do I go back? What's not working? Analytical, like, okay, what's not working and how do I fix it? Versus the I'm just going to sit down and let things flow. And I feel like for me, those two sides are in constant conversation with one another, which can also be a bad thing because then the analytical side's like, what are you doing? That's not
Yeah.
very good. And I have to be like, no, you go sit over there. We're
Right.
working here. You can come in later because I always know it'll be able to come in later. So there is a constant conversation there. And I think that like you have to show up and you have to be consistent. Like I said, it doesn't have to be every day. I think a lot of writers are like, you have to write every day. I like to write every day. I think it's great. But it's the there is that sort of analytical like boom 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 um, sense of those two things have to work together because to be a creative person is not just it's not just talent. That's another thing.
Right.
And I think like, oh, you're so talented. It's like, no, I worked for this.
I
Like,
worked
yeah,
so
I might have
hard.
had a predisposition for a thing, but
Yeah.
I kept showing up. And
Right.
when I was teaching dance, I taught adults. I exclusively taught adults. And adults get very frustrated with this process because they want to see results right away. And so I get people who'd never danced before, and I'm so proud of them for showing up, right? They're coming to a thing that they've never done before with a giant mirror in front of them.
Yeah.
So, it brings up a lot of body image and, you know, self-perception issues. And they're like, I don't feel like I'm getting any better. And I said, if you come to class once a week, you have no choice but to get better.
Yeah.
So long answer to your question, but I think those two things have to be in conversation with one another, and it's something I get really frustrated when I see people getting frustrated with themselves, I get frustrated too. I'm like, yeah, you just have to keep going.
Yes. Well, and I think you're so right. Like the romanticization of the creative process. Like, my husband is a composer.
Oh,
He
cool.
he teaches at the university. He was my very first art coach when I got into to visual art because I was like, how do you make something be? Because I grew up and I saw like Amadeus and stuff. And so you're like, oh, he's just hearing this massive symphony, this requiem in his head, and he
Right,
just
right.
writes it down. Like it's just all there, and he just wrote it down. That's all there is to it. Like it's not. They present to us like the agony of the creative process, like
Mm.
the insanity of it. Now you've disconnected, but they don't, which I'm sure some people experience, but I don't think that's the norm. Norm. Like
Right.
I think most of us, like you were saying, it's that both sides because I do view myself as very much an intuitive creative.
Mm.
Like my background, speaking of other people who have interesting backgrounds, my degree is actually in music performance. So
Oh, I love that. So, yeah,
that's
like
your
my
ass.
partner, he's a musician, so, we're a very musical household too. So, yeah.
Thanks. Um, but like, so that whole time, like when I was going through university, like I was the person going, I don't really care about the theory. I can just, you can hear where it's gonna go. I don't need to know what it's called to know where it's gonna go. I'm just gonna listen to it. My husband is very much the analytical creative. Like
Mm.
he likes playing inside of the rules. He does a lot of algorithmic composition and playing with all sorts of rules-based things and programs and stuff. And like that's just it's crazy to me because I don't like rules. But it is it's so interesting because
Mm.
on the flip side, we label ourselves this way, but I know that I don't just sit around and I don't have this great idea and then just make it be so.
Right.
Like I have to go through what I consider like the alchemy because it's like the scientific process, but without something you can't quite, it's not as
Yeah,
reliable.
I
It's
totally, I
a
know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you have to go through that process and explore, and this is what's working, this is what's not working, and this is what I like, and this is what I don't like. And sometimes, like you say, like with your second novel, like I don't like this, and now I got to fix it. And I'm like, I don't like it. That's all I know. I don't know how to fix it, but I don't like it, and that's all I've learned is I don't like it, and that's valid. And it's so hard to as an adult especially who is like, oh, I'm making this dish, it tastes a little funny, I'll add a little bit more of this, or I'm doing this laundry, this didn't turn out right, so or I've got a stain, this is how I'm going to treat it. You're so used to knowing what to do, and then the creative process, and especially like learning any new skill as an adult, you don't know. You're just like, it's bad and I don't know why. I just know
Yeah.
bad.
That also, I wrote a note to myself because I think you're talking about, like we are talking about, in how do things that feel very different in your life actually inform where you are now. And one
Mhm.
of the big debates, and it comes up over and over and over and over again in belly dance in particular, is this quote unquote technique versus emotion. Oh, you're either a very technical dancer or you're a very expressive
Uh-huh.
dancer. And the school where I studied, um, the idea is that you're both.
Mhm.
It's a very technical school. You're learning very specific muscular execution of movement. And then in the higher levels, you're learning acting skills. You're learning the emotional meaning of music. You're tapping into these really sometimes scary and uncomfortable places so that you can call on this muscle memory in order to create a transformative and emotional performance. And when you mentioned that, I was like, oh, that is definitely a through line in a lot of what I do as well, because at the agency, like we were just coming out of the failure of September 11th, and we were just in the middle of the failure of Iraq. And so there was a lot of debate about were people just kind of following the technique of analysis, the sort of the things you're supposed to do, rather than looking outside and different perspectives and calling in ideas that might feel uncomfortable or weird or unusual, to make sure that we weren't missing anything. So it's like that idea of you have these base skills, but you can't just rely on those base skills. um, and we even call it the art of intelligence analysis. Like we call it the art. So there is an acknowledgement there that it is something intuitive, that it is something creative, and that it isn't just follow these rules, write the
Right.
report, brief the guy, you know.
Right.
and and that's the kind of process that gets the agency into a lot of trouble because you're just like, well, I didn't know I could say that, or I didn't think of it that way, or I just assumed. We always had this thing like question your assumption. So, and then there it is again in the belly dance world because people see the expression, they see the emotion, they feel, they know what they feel when they watch a dancer, but they might not necessarily know what they're seeing in their movements.
Mhm.
What they're seeing is the technique, and with technique comes confidence. And when you see a really great dancer of any kind, any style, any genre, when you see a great mover like a gymnast or a figure skater or a diver, or you watch the Olympics, you see someone who's really great at what they're doing is because they're confident and they trust themselves.
Right.
I think that's with art, art too. They're confident and they trust themselves. And and now here I am as a writer. You have all these discussions about writing craft, which is the technique,
Hmm.
and then the emotion and the storytelling. And it is like alchemy, like you said. And I really like that word because there is a magic to the process. And there's a magic when you get into that flow state. You know, when your brain switches and all of a sudden you're just in it and everything's working. And it's a lot easier to get into that flow state if you're showing up every day or every, whatever it is, every Tuesday, whatever it is your schedule is. Yeah, but that technique versus, I said technique versus intuition or technique versus emotion. And for me as an artist, it's always been, well, for me, I need one in order to reach the other and they inform each other. And I know
Right.
that's not true for everybody, but that's something because I am this analytical creative. um, that's always been a through line as well.
Yeah.
Even when I was a teenager and I was competitive figure skater, I was always the artistic skater,
Okay.
which
That's
is funny
interesting.
because as a belly dancer, I was always the technical dancer. So I came
Yeah.
from skating where I was the artistic one, and then I
Right.
do this new art form, and they're like, "Oh, you're the technical one." I'm like,
Well,
"What? I'm the same person. What's happening?"
and then, well, the fun thing is, like for me, I went from when I was in high school, I was the expressive player, and then when I got to college, I was the technical player, and I'm like,
Funny.
I think maybe you guys are just. It's not so much about me. I think it's about where I fall in everything else.
Yeah.
Um, but it's so true because that technique, and I feel like this goes back to so much modern contemporary art where people are always like, "Oh, I could do that," because the technique. I feel like you have to get to a certain point with your technique and your understanding that you then know what you can put away
Yes.
and say, I'm going to, because it's then a conscious choice and
Yes.
something I'm trying to accomplish by putting away this part of the technique. Maybe, letting go and coming back to childhood movement, just very, very rough, very intuitive, no finesse to it, just, gross motor. and
Right.
and that's beautiful because it was intentional, um,
Mm-hmm.
as an adult. For kids, it's beautiful, whatever, because
Exactly.
that's where
Exactly.
they are. Like that's
Exactly. That's where they need to be.
yes. But as an adult to be able to come back to that, I think is actually very difficult.
Yeah.
because you have to make the choice to let go of good,
Oh my gosh.
you know,
Yes.
like this is right. This is good. And you have the
Yeah.
choice to say, that's not important. Because sometimes technique is what allows us to tell the story, and sometimes technique stands in the way of the story. Because if you're trying to communicate, in the words of a child and you're using, college level vocabulary, it's not going to feel authentic. And that's where, like, I love the gray area. I am not a black and white person. I'm like, we can't do this. It's not all or none. You have to be open to what works in the situation, but you still need the tools. You still you have to have the tools. Otherwise, you are limited. Um, and I don't know about you. I don't like limits.
Oh no, absolutely not.
I'm a spite-filled person. That's how I function. I'm like, no, you don't get to tell me what I can't do. Now I will prove you wrong. Okay.
Definitely fueled by coffee and spite. It's true.
Yes.
Yeah, I wrote in a little note here about play. Um, I'm totally gonna bungle this, and y there was some study recently. I don't even know if it was recently. Maybe I just read it recently. But anyway, the study said that you learn something faster when you approach it as play than when you approach it as work.
Mhm.
And that really stuck with me because I, you as a kid, you learn things so quickly. First of all, your brain is just like, a
Yeah.
sponge.
Spongy.
But part of it is that we are learning through play. And so it's this study, I think, studied adults, and it was like the adults who played learned the thing faster. And I think that's something for us, especially living in the United States. Like, it's very hard for us to just do something for the sake of fun because we've been enculturated into this. I'm gonna get a little theological here. This sort of Protestant Calvinist, like,
Mhm.
work and toil are the only things worth doing, and if you're not suffering, then it's not worth doing, and you should be working, and work is prayer, and all this kind of
Idle
thing.
hands are the devil's playground.
Oh my gosh. And I think this is why there's so much misunderstanding about creative people is that like how oh, you're making money doing something you love. You should just do it for the love. And it's like that's where those ideologies clash.
Right.
And adults coming into creative practices, I think it's very hard for them to let that go. And I think it's very hard for them to approach something with the a child's mind. And it's something that I always try to do, especially writing my novels because the protagonist is a teenage girl. And so if I'm not remembering what I was like, and it's not autobiographical, but I still have to be like, okay, I am in
Right.
teenage headspace. What
Yes.
does that feel like? I can't,
Mhm.
you have to be able to get in touch with that pre-adult brain. And I think that's really hard for adults who want to be creative is that they want the product right away, and they are not understanding that the process is actually so much more important than the product. And then we get into the whole generative AI thing, which is all just product versus process.
Right.
Um, but one thing, and this is going to sound so cliche, one thing that did really transform me as a creative person is I've I've done the artist's way like all the way through, and that part, so much of it is getting in touch with that childlike view of the world. You take yourself out on artist dates. Basically, you go somewhere by yourself, somewhere fun, just for the fun of it.
Yeah.
So you go to like an antique shop or go to a used bookstore, go take a walk in the woods, whatever it is, just to tap into that childlike nature. And I think that is very hard for adults in any place. And it's so funny because I'm going back to like this. I took a course at the agency that was creativity in intelligence analysis, and we did a lot of that. We like took field trips. We went to museums and like. wrote observations of what we saw. It had like nothing to do with classified anything or politics anything. It was just here's creative tools and that yeah, that sort of that whimsy and that wonder goes a really long way. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I'm like, yeah, people who lose touch with that childlike nature, I think it's really hard for them to see, I don't know how to use this word, the value in creativity. Ugh, that's another like very like capitalist word, but um you know what I mean. There's value in the doing for personal, you know,
Right,
enrichment.
right.
Yeah.
Do you find that you have to make space to practice going back to that, that whimsy, that wonder, or how do you
Ooh.
incorporate that?
Yeah. I mean, I do the artist states for sure.
Mhm.
Not as often as I probably should, but I do. Um, I also like I love a good playlist, and I have playlists that are of music that I listened to when I was a teenager. And so music is so powerful. I mean, you know,
Mhm.
music is it can take you back to a moment and take you back to very specific moments. So I use a lot of playlists of music to get me into that space. Um, I feel like it's more of a habit than it is like I'm gonna do the thing. Like, oh,
Mhm.
I'm okay, I'm working on my book. I'm gonna listen to this music to get me into that space. Um, this is sort of an accidental thing, but I do find now that I'm back in the skating world. Um, as an adult, being an adult figure skater is very different from being a kid. One, I'm doing it for me, it's on my terms. Not that I was ever doing it for anyone else, but it was very much more competitive and doing all the competitions and the training and but you're on the ice with kids. Your practice is you're sharing the ice with kids and watching the kids is also super inspiring. So, um and that feels like I could get really creepy really fast. But I do find that inter like I don't have kids, so I don't interact with children on a daily basis, but I do feel like if you're feeling stuck, like go hang out with some kids.
Yeah.
Go like you know, watching them play and experiment and um just have fun. And I'm like, oh right, we're here to have fun.
Hmm.
Like,
That
what are
is
we
the
doing? This is
point.
supposed to be fun.
Yeah.
And they'll slide around and they'll try crazy tricks and improv to music and um yeah,
Their
kids.
imaginative play, like I do have kids, and I've wondered often how much, because my younger son is just, he is in a world of his own all the time, like, and he will come up with the most elaborate
Mm,
imaginative play games that I can't keep track of the world we're in, the rules, because we have new physics rules, we have new this and that, and I'm like, I can't do it. You're 9 and you've left me in the dust. But it's so amazing to watch and just realize, like, I think it's they haven't lived so long with no, that's not possible, that they
yes.
spend so much time in the impossible. And then, like, what I love doing with him is I'm like, well, how does that work? How, okay, those things are sticking to the walls. How's that working? And he finds a solution, like,
That's
because
amazing.
it's not, his first thought isn't, oh, that's not possible, but is, oh, it's not, obvious, it's not assumed how that's going to work. Let me come up with how it can work. And I'm like, I think I think spending time with the kids and these kind of things are so much of, for me, what makes me go, okay. Like, there are other ways to look at things. We can, instead of just going no, we can
Yep.
ask the question, how could it? What then?
Yes.
What is possible? And I think that's so beautiful. Like, it's funny though, because I've never considered the fact that the kids were having that effect on me. But when you were talking about that, I was like, yeah, that does make sense because it's shifting your perspective of, and retraining your thought process because when you're with kids, you never want to be like, that's not possible, and just
Right.
shut them down. It's
Of
always,
course
oh,
not.
well, how's that working? And it's like, if I can extend that to my child's thought process, why can't I extend that to my thought process and my exploration of, instead of going like, this doesn't work, now it's trash, and throwing it across the room, which I would obviously never do. Um, but instead of that, going, okay, well, how can I make this not wrong? How can I make this not an accident? How can I make this
Mm,
not a problem? Like, how can I make it good? How is it going to work then? And yeah, kids just force you to look at it differently. I love that.
yeah, that childlike nature. We just, as adults, we just say, "Oh, we don't need that anymore. We're adults. We do
Right.
adult things." And and then we wonder why we're so miserable.
Yeah, because we have to have the answers to everything. We're supposed to know what we're doing. And you're not supposed to say, I have no idea. I
Yeah,
I don't know. I'm just winging it, just one day at a time, trying to suck a little less every day and just keep going.
I love that. I'm just trying to suck a little less every day. If, some people could take that as feeling really negative, but I do feel like that is my approach to art. I'm
Yeah,
just trying to suck a little less every day. I'm trying to improve a little bit every day.
I don't,
And
doesn't have to be leaps and bounds, just a little bit less.
yeah, I I wrote down improv as you were talking because this is related to play.
Hmm.
And um, there's so many ways that improvisation can manifest in different art forms. Obviously, in dance, it's just going and noodling, right? We call it noodling, but it's also its own craft in the postmodern dance world. Um, you have improvisational prompts of there's sort of these loose cues and loose rules, scores. I'm thinking more like Anna Halprin was a real master of this kind of improvisational dance with scores, sort of a loose structure of what the thing, or for anybody who's listening, Simone Forti also is another. And we did a lot of work in this improvisational space in my grad program, and it's I found it so valuable because you had a series of cues. So it wasn't completely open-ended. You had a structure, but you had options within that structure. And that's also like I feel like that's a really powerful place to be as an artist because the pressure is off to create something brilliant.
Right.
And with dance, everything's in the moment. You do it and it's gone. Even if it's videoed, the video's never the same. So
Hmm.
dance is this really this ephemeral thing that almost doesn't exist, which is weird to think about. Things I think about way too much. Dance doesn't exist, all right? It's the movement, and you observe this movement, but once you do it, it's gone. And so it does allow for a lot of freedom in that if you go to a studio by yourself and that you're not trying to create something brilliant. But I think when we're starting to put things on paper or on a canvas or on a screen, it's more static. And so it stares us in the face and goes, "Hi, I am not as good as you want me to be." And so I find that with writing, being able to finding ways to write in low stakes situations, whether or not it's privately or maybe it's a blog post, or maybe it's an email newsletter, rather than going like everything I write is going to be for this one book and this one novel. So having
Right.
lower stakes places to play and improvise with your art is, um, I think it's essential.
Mhm.
I mean, that's like artists have their sketchbooks. It's the same thing. Like if you look at like the masters and you go to a museum, you might see that one famous painting, but then you'll go to the rest of the gallery and you'll see their studies.
Right.
And I actually find the studies so much more interesting than the finished work because that's where that I feel like there's more freedom in that.
Mhm. And I love when they show like all of the planning pieces and everything.
Yeah.
Like so you can see the whole journey, how it went from like just this random blob that they sketched and you're like, what even is that? Which as somebody who came to visual art later in life, like that was so rewarding to realize that you can actually start there. You can start with a blob
Yeah.
and then just keep refining, keep exploring, keep changing and feeling your way through it. I think is so rewarding to be able to see that journey. Um, I do want to ask you though,
Sure.
talking about improvisation, because that is definitely something that from my music background, I hated when improv classes. Hated it. I mean, I played bassoon, so there was no like jazz in me or anything. And I was like, why are
I
we
was
not
like,
saying the
well,
note?
now I really need some jazz bassoon. I love the bassoon and I love jazz, so please, can you make jazz bassoon a thing?
There is there is some out there. There actually is. But yeah, not my thing. And like I hated we had to take this basic improv class and I hated almost every second of it because um I was a young adult. I was, in my teens, early 20s, and they gave us, hey, here's do it in this style of jazz, do it in this style of blues, do it in this klezmer style, do it in this style. And there were rules, very specific rules
Uh-huh.
you had to follow while making something up out of thin air. And I
Yeah.
hated it. I was like, this is so terrifying because I was not okay being bad at it. I was,
Yeah.
and I was like, you can definitively do it wrong. Like, this is, you just gave me something that I can do wrong. But then we got to free improv, which was just do whatever you want. And I found I loved that because I loved doing it in small chamber groups and we would play off of each other.
Mm.
And you hear what one person does and then you do something in response and then and it was magical. Um but I sometimes wonder if I went back now because I have worked very hard to be less precious about what I'm doing and being able to say, it's okay. Things don't have to be perfect. And also to be able to go back with the mindset of, hey, this is a time-based medium. It's like you said about dance, it's not even real. It didn't even
Not even real.
yeah, like did it happen? You weren't here, so you don't know. And if you were here, you have no proof. Like
I
it
love it.
it didn't happen. So I wonder going back how that would change things. And the reason that I went down this tangent, sorry, I'm a very tangential
Please,
person,
please.
is because I was thinking about the use of improv for getting into like that kind of a mindset. Because I've thought before, like I very much have wanted to incorporate like improvisational dance into starting each studio practice.
Ooh.
But I'm scared, and that's what stops me every time. This is a mental block, and I know it's a mental block, but I was thinking like how beautiful that would be to be able to give yourself that freedom of, like this isn't real, no one will know, like it's gone once the present is no longer the present, which is instantaneous, this has ceased to be. and now you're getting yourself into that mindset of freedom. Is that something that you ever do? This is where I was coming to. Is
Oh
that
yes.
something that you do, like, to sit down to prepare yourself, or like
Ooh,
if you're struggling with your writing or anything like that?
Ooh, that's a fantastic question. Yeah, because improvisation as a writer looks really different than improvisation as a dancer or an artist. I mean, like a visual artist. Um, I think, yeah, I mean, I definitely have used something equivalent, and that would just be free writing.
Mhm.
I, when I'm feeling stuck, I write by hand. I have a big notebook where I just write. Um, and it's a little different from like the Artist Way morning pages. And if if people are familiar with that, but that is also a way that I kind of handle the sort of the warm up, the improvisational warm up, is so to go on a little thing about morning. So morning pages are an Artist Way practice where basically every morning, right when you wake up, you can have coffee. You can make your coffee first, but basically in the first 45 minutes after you wake up, you sit down and you write 3 pages longhand. So three sides of a sheet of 8.5 by 11. So one, two, three. And it takes about 20 minutes. And you write whatever comes to mind. Like no self-censoring, no this is bad, this is terrible. And the reason is that you're writing in a place that is low stakes. You'll never read it again, and you're getting in the habit of letting things just flow. And so it's kind of like cleaning out your pipes. You're constantly keeping things moving. And so that is something that I notice. I've kind of gotten out of the habit recently and I'm getting back into it, but I notice like things start feeling sticky when I'm not doing that as often. And then if I'm working on like a novel in particular or something else, I like to just write ideas. Or I'm going to write ideas longhand, or sometimes I'm at the computer, but I like the longhand writing of just writing and letting things come to me. And I love what you said about trying to be less precious because I am a recovering perfectionist. And I think a lot of us are like, I'm a high achiever, recovering perfectionist, and having places where I can feel safe to just create and no one else is going to look at it. They're sketchbooks basically.
Mhm.
So that, yeah, absolutely. And those low stakes areas, I think, are where the magic really happens. And I've worked out a lot of plot points in my just free writing. Just like, okay, I don't know what's going on with the scene. Let's just write. Rather than sitting down at my document and going, I need to fix this scene. So I have a sort of place where I put the ideas and then I bring those ideas in. And it's like the artist's sketchbook. It's the same kind of thing.
I like
Um,
the way of looking at that, like having a a non-precious place to do your
yeah,
exploration.
Yeah, I think everybody needs that because we put so much pressure on the thing that we're going to show other people.
Right.
And if you don't have a safe, like, like creative space where you're not showing people, I don't think you're ever going to feel safe or satisfied with what you are presenting to people. You have to have that notebook or yeah, I keep saying sketchbook. I used to sketch a lot when I was younger. That place to just experiment
Yeah.
and play and improvise. And same thing with dance too. Like um I like to just move. If I'm creating a piece, there's a process. There's actually a little bit more of a technique to choreography that I use, which is stuff that I've learned in my training. Um, but that structure actually is meant to scaffold you up to create more easily.
Mhm.
So it is that idea of the technique and the creativity kind of in conversation with one another, but that's a whole different thing. Um, but yeah, definitely having the low stakes areas to play is, yeah,
I
you need that.
because yeah, I had tried doing the morning pages for a while.
Hmm.
And I don't know, I think part of the problem is that my brain just does not function within the first 45 minutes of
That's the whole point.
But like I would just sit there and all I was writing was, I have no thoughts. I have no thoughts. I have those
Oh.
like this is not, and it caused me so much stress that I was like, I'm clearly
No.
doing this wrong because I've got nothing. Like it was
Wow.
like 3 pages of I have nothing to say. No thoughts. So I was like, I might need to change when I do it. uh, but there's also like being able to like it didn't occur to me with my writing because I do everything on the computer because I have messed up hands. That's why I don't quite.
Oh, yeah.
But so I do everything on the computer, and I kept thinking, oh, it's not precious because you can just delete it. Like it's not permanent. But I wonder if the fact that it's in the same document is
Mm,
you've got because your brain does all sorts of mental blocks on you that you
that
don't
does.
realize you're there. So I wonder if that's sometimes where I'm like, you're staring at it going, oh, this needs a transition, or maybe this doesn't even make sense here, but you have no ideas on how to start fixing it. And like if it was in something else, then you have that freedom to just mess around and
Yeah.
play because it's not even the same document, so it's super not permanent. Like I don't even kind of have to commit to this because it's on different pages altogether. So that's a really I had not considered that. Oh my goodness. I'm having thoughts now.
Good. Yeah. And then if I'm working on, I was just thinking about like low stakes areas too. Like, I mean, I have my written stuff, but I also like, I just realized I'm like, oh yeah, I look at certain writing programs as it's sort of a hierarchy of stakes. So the Notes app is the lowest stake.
Mm-hmm.
Like all the seeds and the notes and everything go in the Notes app. So if I'm writing in the Notes app, it's super low pressure. Um, and then this sort of goes up from there. I write my novels in Scrivener, which I
Mm-hmm.
love. It's meant for long form like
Okay.
books.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think this also goes to having the right tools too. Like, I mean, as a visual artist, you know that having better tools doesn't make you the a perfect artist, but it can make it easier. And same with a
Mhm.
musician too. If you're working with an instrument you bought on Amazon, it's not going to sound the same as working
Yeah.
with a Stradivarius. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, so you have to also make sure that you're using the right tools for the art that you want to make.
Mhm.
And for me, Scrivener, this is, I'm not like, I don't get paid by them, but the way that that program is set up is very conducive to the creative process because there's a lot of flexibility. You can move scenes around. There's not a lot of extra fluff. Like Word has a lot of extra fluff
Yeah.
that you don't need as if you're writing a first draft of a book, where Scrivener is meant for writing out scenes. Like you can look at things as note cards or you can look at them as documents. And I think that's very equivalent to working with quality paints or working with quality brushes. Again, it's not going to make you the best writer ever, but it is going to make your work easier. And sorry, I realized
Reliably.
my laptop is not plugged in.
Oh.
Fix that. And then with dance, um, it's a little different, especially for something like belly dance, which is typically you'll do it barefoot, so you don't even need like the best shoes. I like to dance in shoes just because you said you have weird hands. I have weird feet. Um, so I make sure that I'm dancing in the right shoes. And sometimes like the floor makes a difference. But dance is a little different because you're not like you are the art.
Right.
Like you're not making the art outside of yourself, so it is a little bit different, but still having the right tools does make a big difference. And then with skating too, I mean, you are the art, but then you have to make sure you have the boots and the blades. And if you are working with boots and blades that are not quality enough for the kind of skating that you're working on for your level, then it can hold you back. But you can also use stuff that's too advanced for you. like a boot that's too stiff or a blade that's not the right shape for you. Um, so there is that confluence of materials. I don't know how I got on this topic, but but I think that's important too. Like, are you working with the tools and materials that are going to be the most conducive to your process? But you can't like just say, "Oh, I bought the magic pencil and now I'm
Right.
going to be an amazing artist."
It won't do the work for you, but it can make it a much more enjoyable process. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Like,
Like, yeah.
yeah, just the thought of being able to sit down and not have to figure out how am I going to make this like like what's the best way to organize this? What's the best way to do this? Or sitting there, looking at your art supplies going, I don't have a brush that's made for those kind of edges. And so now I have to use this kind of brush. Or, oh my gosh, the worst when you're talking to somebody and they're trying to do watercolor with acrylic brushes and it's like that's not gonna you're gonna hate life because it doesn't hold water. Like it'll be bad, or vice versa. You're never gonna be able to get a really nice crisp line. You're not gonna be able to push the paint around with a watercolor brush because it's too soft. You're just gonna have a
Yeah.
but that's the you can do it, but you
But
won't
do
want
you
to.
want to?
Yeah, you will think that you're really bad and you will think that it's a horrible process. Why would anyone want to do this? And it'll kill the love for it, as opposed
Yeah.
to being able to go, this is totally accessible. And now I can play.
Yeah.
And like,
Yeah.
and I think, yeah, accessibility, that's the big thing. When we talk, there's so many levels of accessibility and so many different kinds. There's so much nuance behind that word
Oh, absolutely.
itself. But that's something I think about a lot in the visual arts space is that it's not a particularly accessible
Mm.
space, especially when we're talking from like finances, like
Oh,
visual,
absolutely.
like it's
Mhm.
stupid expensive just to get the supplies. And my husband, he loves to be like, oh, you just play around. If you don't like it, you just get rid of it. And I'm like, if I don't like it, I just dropped $20 of paint on that and
Yeah.
I can't get it back. There's no undo button. Like for him, I'm like, it's just time. That's all you lost was time.
Right.
For
Hmm.
me, it is like actual money.
Materials. Yeah.
Serious size. Um, is that in the like dance and books? Like I know definitely when you're in publishing and stuff, there's a lot of accessibility issues where like, who do you know? What color are you?
Yeah.
What you know, who's gonna get traditional publishing deals, but are there other kinds of accessibility issues in those areas or
Um, well, I do want to talk about dance for a bit. One is that dance in the United States, I don't want to, I'm going to get into a lot of trouble by saying this, but it's not, it's kind of inherently ableist from a physical ability standpoint because of general perceptions of what a dancer's body is. And also, a lot of dance instructors we're not trained in how, a lot of it, unless we do special training, we're not really trained to teach people with disabilities, whether or not it's like limb differences or invisible disabilities or chronic illness. And there's a lot of pressure in the dance world to just push through discomfort.
Mhm.
And I've done that and I've injured myself worse. And so that's a problem for sure. This sort of idea of like, oh, just suck it up. And you should just suck up some stuff.
Right.
Like, I feel like, oh, your muscles are sore and you're able-bodied. Yeah, but if it's burning and it's swollen, definitely
Yeah.
don't suck it up. Go get help. But
Right.
there is a sense of like, oh, just suck it up. And I am a little bit that way. I gotta suck it up. But from an accessibility standpoint, I think that's still a kind of a frontier in dance. And then to bring up the COVID thing, um, there aren't any precautions now for high risk individuals. And so those people are basically not participating in the spaces anymore. So that's also a thing that I feel like needs to be. That's a big elephant in the room. No one wants to talk about because it's uncomfortable. Um, with publishing, it's a little different because I think finance is the biggest one. I mean, finance is big in dance too, but I feel
Hmm.
like there are a lot of scholarships and um, like studios will do their own scholarships, and there's also a lot of dancers are doing sliding scale for their classes. So I feel like that's starting to shift a little bit. But in the publishing world, like even self-publishing, if you want to publish well, it's going to cost a lot of money. Like to hire an editor, and there's like up to like 4 or 5 levels of editing. So
Hmm.
there's a developmental edit, there's a line edit, there's a copy edit, there's a proofread, um, and a developmental edit for a book that's 100,000 words can run you over $2,000. That's a lot of money. Um, so there's the financial accessibility, and then if you want to hire a cover artist, I'm in a position where I was able to and wanted to hire a cover artist because she was the perfect artist for the job, and that, full transparency, that cost $800, which I still think was really cheap for what she did because she's amazing. But it's, if you don't have $800, you don't have $800.
Right.
Um, and then you don't get a lot of, unless you have a breakout hit, there isn't a lot of financial return if you're self-publishing, unless you're really aggressive with your marketing, which some people are, and they do the thing, and they actually make a profit on their books. But I would say most people don't, because we're artists and not marketers, you know. But the financial thing is definitely true for self-publishing, and then there is um, the representation and the diversity issue in traditional publishing, where Um, I think it comes down to what publishers think is marketable in the moment, and that's shifting all the time. And we live in a society. Our current cultural zeitgeist still prefers white perspectives, because that's where it's perceived that more of the money is.
Hmm.
Whether or not that's true is absolutely arguable, because you'll see authors like N.K. Jemisin and P. Jelly Clark and Octavia Butler, um, writing these wildly successful series and being successful authors. So that whole thing of like, oh, this is marketable, and like that's just what you think is marketable because you haven't imagined a world where that's different. So
Exactly.
that's a whole thing. I don't want to say everyone in the publishing world is like that because that's not true. There are a lot of writers who are pushing back. There are a lot of authors who are just by their presence in the field are shifting that landscape. Um, oh, I want to mention Saba Tahir too, who I love. Um, yeah, so writers of color, I think. I mean, I'm not obviously. I am a pale person, so that's not something that I have experienced, but I know it's a reality, and
Yeah.
it's a problem. It's totally a problem. So it's like you could go traditional publishing and face a lot of that, and then there's also a lot of resistance to queer stories in the traditional publishing space. There are a lot more, like way more queer stories in the traditional publishing space, than say like 10, 15 years ago. But I know that a lot of authors are struggling with trying to get their books out there in the traditional space because the sort of heteronormative stories are the ones that are quote unquote selling. And I don't,
Right.
it's like, well, if you published really great queer stories, they would probably sell too. So a lot
It's
of
funny
people
how,
are just,
like, if that's all you publish, then yes, that's all that's gonna sell. It's funny how that works. Like
yeah,
people
yeah.
can't buy what you're not. putting out there.
Exactly. So, self-publishing is, I think, really, I think, putting pressure on the traditional publishers in a lot of way because they're seeing like what's happening in the self-published space, and it's very different than the trad pub space. And I think each has their benefits and each has their drawbacks. Um, but it's I don't know how much time we have, but I have another rant to go on.
At it.
So I talk about like finances, and I do feel like there are some, yeah. So this is gonna sound super privileged. I don't want to sound super privileged. Um, if you like, the issue of money is real, especially now. But I also do feel like there's this thing in the writing world, this author, right when I'm making a face because I'm trying to make sure I get my facts right, and this is all from memory. So in the early days of self-publishing, there were also a lot of predatory publishers who were trying to take advantage of people who wanted to be published and were charging them money to publish their books.
Mhm.
And they had no real standards for publication. They were just like, give us your book and we'll publish it. Call those vanity publishers. Now, really taking advantage of authors who wanted to be published because that's exciting. And so, someone, and I can't remember his name, he said all money should flow towards the author, which has now kind of turned into this idea of I shouldn't have to pay for anything ever. And I'm
Mhm.
exaggerating, but I do feel like there's a little bit of that sense. And so when self-published authors are looking at editors and they're like, "Oh, how much does this cost?" and we're like, "Well, for your 100,000 word book, it'll probably cost you over $2,000." And they're like, "Oh, that's a lot of money." And it's one thing if you don't have the money.
Right.
Then you work on it. We could do payment plans, could do sliding scale. A lot of editors will do that. But I think there's also this idea that like I don't need to spend money on that because I'm going to go get a traditional publishing gig and get money.
Mhm.
And then I start having this thing with myself, and I haven't really written about it yet in the public space, but this idea of like hobby versus profession. And if you have the money and you just don't want to because you think all money should flow towards the author, that's a different situation. And what you're doing as a writer is you have a hobby. And that doesn't mean to demean it. It's not
Right.
saying oh, it's just a hobby. No, we all
Right.
need hobbies in
Yeah.
order to live fulfilling and enriched lives. Figure skating is my hobby. Do I make money off of it? No, I spend way too much money.
Right.
My boots were really expensive. My blades were really expensive. And I'm very privileged to be in a place where I can afford that.
Mhm.
I want to make that really clear. But it's the people who are like, I need to like. So there's these ideas of what you should spend money and what you shouldn't spend money on, which is a thing that's happening in the writing, like the self-pub world right now. And everybody's path is different.
Right.
And there are different ways to get input on your book that aren't necessarily paying for a developmental editor. You could go to a writer's group, you could read craft books, but all of it is an investment of some sort. It's an investment of
Right.
time, an investment of energy, an investment of money. So
Exactly.
it's just sort of figuring out like what do you want to invest in if you want to publish a book that you're really proud of and that people will read and go, I really loved this because it's possible. You can self-pub and write a brilliant book. It happens all the time. And
Mhm.
those are the people who do invest something in those books, whether or not it's editing, writing groups, um, you know, extensive beta readers. They're all investing something in it. And I think there's this idea that they're going to make money off of writing, and it's as a working artist, you can be like, well, you're gonna probably invest a lot of money in your art before you actually start making money. And I put this in quotes because
Mhm.
I don't even know what that means anymore.
You
I
should
don't
still
know. That
publish.
that rant's probably gonna get me in a lot of trouble, but I do feel like there's a little bit of like expectation difference.
Yeah.
And this is true in the belly dance world too. You have people who start dancing and they enjoy it and they have a lot of fun, but they don't have a lot of training, and then they're trying to go get gigs and then they undercut the professionals And they're like, but I'm just doing it for the exposure and I do it because I love it. And it's like, yeah, well, you just took away a job from a professional. And that's not happening in the writing world. But
Right.
there is that still that idea of like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's very, and I think it all comes down to like the way we look at creative pursuits as a culture, and how that has to be, it doesn't have to be, but the way it is in conversation with the economic system that we're in and the political system that we're in, and how much it just clashes all the time. And it's really unfortunate and it's really frustrating.
Because you should, like you said earlier, we should just be doing our creative stuff as a gift for everybody else.
For the
Be-
exposure.
because we like it. It brings us joy. We should just give it away. Like, doesn't work that doesn't work that way.
Like, sure, my mortgage company will love that. Like, oh, here's
Yeah,
I've talked about you. Is that I
exactly.
told people about your company.
Now my house is free.
Ah, now I don't have to pay.
Yep. Well, but yes, it is the valuation that we put as a society on different roles while forgetting that creativity is essential.
Mhm.
And if you don't, like, everybody needs creativity to I'm going to say to some extent, but really to a large extent. Like, you need creativity. That's how we solve problems. That's how we
Mhm.
understand each other. That's how we understand the world. That's um that's how humans have gotten to where we are.
Absolutely.
We would not be where we are without creativity. Um, but I think people forget that it's just like any other area. Like, we all have some general understanding of medicine and health and our bodies. And we have that understanding because some people have focused on it. And
Right.
we all have some general understanding about how things are built and how machines run because some people have focused on it. We all have creativity and know how to use it because some people have focused on it and have expounded on it.
Yeah.
It will not continue to be part of who we are if we don't nourish it, if we don't have artists, if we don't have creatives, if we don't have these things, because that's what's going to spark it in other people. And like, every time I talk to scientists who are like, oh no, the arts are like massively important because that creativity, that process gives us ideas. Like, that is, we bring that same process into discoveries, scientific discoveries, where you're like, oh,
Yes.
them, oh no, it's STEAM. You need the A, you need the arts. And I think people forget that you have to have people who are actually focusing on it,
Mhm.
because
Professional creatives.
yeah,
Absolutely.
there's
Yeah.
there's not enough time and energy left at the end of the day if you've been, working your 9 to 5 that's draining you. You don't have enough at the end. But hundreds of years ago, we had people who, like, their job was to be the artisan, their job was to be the storyteller. Like, this was their function in
Mhm.
society. It's still valid. It's perhaps more valid today. Like, it's so important, but we don't want to pay them.
We don't want to pay them.
And we don't want to acknowledge that what they're doing is important and that it has value, because they say, well, if you had a heart attack, who's more important, the cardiologist or the artist? And I'm like, I still think the artist, like, it's not a zero sum
It's
thing.
not a zero something. And then we get into issues of like ideas of scarcity mindset and and what creates quote unquote value in a culture and in a society where um, quarterly profits are basically what drives everything. And art doesn't art doesn't work like that. It's so much, it's long term, it's personal, it's mysterious in a lot of ways. Like even if you're showing up and you're doing the work and the Stephen Pressfield put your butt where your heart wants to be, there's still a mystery and you can't quantify mystery. I can't sell stocks in mystery.
Right. Right.
You're like, oh, I'm gonna, go public with my creative use. I don't know. And
And
that
out there.
frustrates people who want to sell things.
Right.
Um, because they're like, how can I commodify this?
Yeah.
And commodification usually means the fast churn out of a material or the fast churn out of a thing. And creativity doesn't work that way. You can't just churn out the same thing over and over and over again. None of us wants to be the, you know, Shein of art. And that's what generative AI is. Did I say that? Yes.
Good company. But yeah, it's the, and I hate this term, but I can't think of another one off the top of my head. So please feel free to correct me
Oh,
if you
no.
different one. But it's like the commodification of the arts. It's the dumbing down because it has to dumb it down. Otherwise, you can't mass scale it. You
Right.
can't you can't put the same level of thought and ingenuity into 100 things a month as you
Mm-hmm.
can one thing a month. Like it's the like I can't think of examples, but there are some, I think Radiohead is one, but there are some bands out there who have like, their commercial music. This is what's on the radio. And then at the end of the album is some like out there stuff
Right.
that they enjoyed making. And I'm like, yes. However, I would prefer they not had to make the whole I would prefer to not have 10 commercial songs and have five really good what they wanted to make instead of 10 commercial songs and one what they really wanted to make. Because I'm like, that one that they really wanted to make, that's the cool stuff. That's where it is. Everything else is just filler. And at the risk of sounding very something, I don't know. It's a waste of their creative potential to have to bring it down to appease the masses instead of letting it just be there. Because we're only saying that's going to appease the masses because again, it's the this is what will sell. It's
Right.
like, you don't know. I know plenty of people who love those final tracks. Like, I bet they could sell plenty of albums of everything. So this is not, I know this sounds very elitist. It's not about the elitism. It's about the, we're, we're like, the commercialization, the commodification is preventing the masses from having access
Yes.
to amazing stuff. That's it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I have to go in a bit,
Oh, yes.
but I do want to bring up because this is um, related. So one of my favorite bands is Rush, and their breakout album is basically when they snubbed their noses at their record album and made the album they wanted to make, and it's the album that made them. Like that's the album that made them famous. So it's like that was a time when you had a contract with a label
Mhm.
to put out a certain number of albums. So there was a little bit more freedom in there to play, but yeah, their label was like, no, we need radio hits, we need commercial stuff, and they were like, screw it,
Yeah.
we're gonna create this weird sci-fi prog rock thing. And that's when their label said, oh, I guess we should just let you do what you want to do. So it's like if
Yeah.
they took a chance and, on like, and actually said, okay, we're going to fund this, we're going to take a chance on it, but no one wants to do that anymore. They want the instant hit.
Right.
And I think that's the same with art and with books, especially with publishers. They want the instant hit, and they're not investing the time in the creatives to develop them in the way that, say, record labels did in the 70s. Like you see these bands, like, I'm a big progressive rock fan, like these bands like Yes and Genesis and Jethro Tull. I mean, they're selling out like stadiums.
Right.
You think that would happen now? No one would go see like a rock band with a flute solo. Like,
Right.
I mean, people do. Prog is actually having a moment right now, but the record labels don't think so. They're all in small labels. They're all self-produced. It's a more insular community now than it is like we're going to be out on these major record labels. So it's, yeah, the perception of time I think has shifted with regard to creative output. We need it now
Yes.
because that quarterly profit. So
Yep.
let's churn out the book and put out the thing, and we're not going to invest in the artist. And
Right. And you better have the next one on the back burner already,
oh
ready.
yeah, chop
Like,
chop.
doesn't take any time.
Yeah.
For sure. Well, I know definitely this has gone longer than I expected to,
That's
but
okay.
it was wonderful. So
This
I
is
will
great.
let you get back to your afternoon, but thank you so much.
Thank you. This
This,
was so fun.
oh, I knew it was going to be good, and it was maybe better than I expected.
Oh yeah.
So I'm so excited. So definitely for everybody who's watching the replay, I will have all of Abigail's information in the notes below, and we will get information about her book too, which we did a horrible job.
Yeah. Oh well, oh, wait, do a last little like plug. So
Yes.
this is Daughter of Sekhmet. It is a historical fantasy set in ancient Egypt during the reign of Ramesses II, aka Ramesses the Great. And if you like strong but sometimes foolish female heroines, a touch of romance, there are quite a few queer characters, political intrigue, um, authoritative baddies. Um, this is the book for you. Oh, a little
Everything.
bit of magic. Obviously, there's always a little bit of magic. So this is available through all major booksellers online. So bookshop.org, Barnes& and Noble, all the places, and the ebooks are available too. So ta-da! I'm very proud of this.
Definitely include a link to the bookshop.org uh,
Yeah, totally.
on there because they're my faves. But I'm so excited, and I think I will definitely be buying one for myself because
Yay!
I've
Thank
been
you.
staring at it for a few months, going, "Oh, I really need to read that. I really need to read that, and now I need to do it." But this has been so wonderful.
Thank you for having me. This was so fun.
So glad. And definitely, anytime you want to have another chat, here I am.
Yeah, let's
But
do it.
definitely, well, have a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you.